Hello, I'm Simon Roderick from Fram Search, and I'm delighted to be joined today by Hugi Clarke, partner of the leading investment management firm Foresight Group, who you may have seen have just recently listed. So congratulations on that, Hugi, to you and your colleagues. I wish you all every continued success. I want to talk to you today about sales, but before I do, just tell me a little bit about your lockdown experience and how you're keeping.
So lockdown has been a voyage, as it has for us all, but mostly good. I was very fortunate to have my first child just over a month ago. So if there were any signs of boredom, they have quickly evaporated, and what was once known as boredom is now known as the good old days. But, no, very fortunate to be keeping well, thank you.
That's fantastic news. Congratulations. I obviously want to talk to you a lot about sales. You've had a long career of managing and leading sales teams. Obviously, you've obviously been on the front line as well. But before I do, would you mind telling those who are watching about your career and about your current role?
Yeah, of course. So my career in financial services started back in the late 90s with Inter Alliance, where I actually joined believing I was going to be a fund manager. And it was only when I was writing reports on income protection that I realized perhaps I'd taken a wrong turn somewhere. But that was a really great basis for me in the industry. Picked up my professional qualifications, spent about 4 or 5 years there before joining Zurich as a field-based BDM up in the East Midlands. Again, another really rich learning experience on the other side of the desk from an advisor. Actually fortunate enough to be given the opportunity to become a sales manager at Zurich, covering the East Anglia region with a team of 9 at its height, before being recruited into the tax efficient space by Octopus back in 2011. Worked as a regional director at Octopus for 5 years, before again being headhunted into Foresight, effectively into a national sales director role. That's the kind of nearest proxy. And bizarrely, I've also done 5 years there. And if you look at my history of employment, generally it's 5 years and out. So I'm looking around the corner at Foresight, hopefully not. But yeah, that's my role as we are today.
You can imagine my surprise, Hugi, when I thought I was going to be a fund manager, but I ended up in recruitment. So if you were surprised,
yeah, that's how they get you. They lure you in with the promise of fund management and then pull the old switcheroo.
So sales teams, as you know, in any industry actually, are renowned for morale, the camaraderie, sharing best practice, bouncing off each other. Obviously, lockdown has changed that dynamic significantly. How have you managed to maintain culture and that feeling of team during this very difficult time?
Yeah, it's a good question, and it's not an easy thing to manage. As you say, sales teams, by their definition, often feed off of if not one another, certainly their clients, and that kind of interaction, and indeed that culture that you create within the team. And so while it's been one of the most important things to replicate and maintain, clearly social distancing and video calls, etc., make it quite difficult. There are a handful of things we've tried to do to keep that energy and that vibe as best we can, and some perhaps more unusual than others. I think the first thing to say is, as far as we were concerned, kind of variety is key. I think most people have done their share of quizzes. In fact, not sure there are many quiz questions I couldn't answer anymore, having done so many of them. But often people run out of track after they've come up with a quiz or perhaps an online drink. But there are actually, once you start to get creative, a number of different things that you can do. To name just a few of them, we've done online bingo, we've had online magicians, online comedians, you name it. We've really tried to mix it up in terms of that activity. We have encouraged the team to get out and about. So I think one of the things that we were very mindful of is, if you're not very careful, people can very much retreat into their homes, and without a good reason to go outside, before you know it, you've spent day after day indoors. So we introduced a thing we call the happy hours, where in addition to any other breaks that people might take in the course of the day, we ask them to take an hour where they just get outside and go for a walk, or go sit in a park, or do whatever they might want to do to get some air in their lungs. And to try and make that fun and inclusive and interactive, we invite everyone to send in photographs of how they've spent their happy hour. And we just do a summary each week of the things that people have been up to. And again, that just keeps it fun, hopefully keeps it interesting for people. But I think one of the more valuable things that we've done is actually just try and recreate some of that office environment and that normal interaction, literally by just picking up the phone and chatting to people. One of the things we spotted quite early was that, you know, in a normal working environment, you'd bump into people in the kitchen, you'd look over your shoulder and chat to people at your desk. You'd have these impromptu conversations and catch-ups that are all part of just being at work together and building a team and being part of a culture. And so we have tried to recreate that, as I say, either by just calling people up and literally going, look, let's not talk about work at all. Can take some persuading when someone's boss calls them up and says they don't want to talk about work. The expectation is always to explain themselves and to reassure you that they are keeping busy. But we have just tried to create that little bit of social opportunity to keep things ticking over, to keep people feeling as though they're part of an enjoyable environment. And I guess as important, they're part of an environment where the leadership really does care for them, cares for their well-being. We've had a lot of feedback and compliments on some of the things we've done, just to try and encourage people to get through this as best they can. And I think that will hopefully pay dividends in the long run.
I love that expression, social opportunity, as well, because I think particularly for those who are starting out in their career, one of the great things about being in the office is that you get to meet, the leadership team, and you have that kind of water cooler moment, and you realise that actually that very senior director is a normal person as well, and they too like
Absolutely.
football, or they've watched EastEnders or whatever it is, and they're normal. And I think my fear is about remote working is that those barriers go up. So I think it's great that you're trying to create that social cohesion as much as anything else.
Yeah, again, I think it's easy to forget, and I'm also conscious it might seem somewhat cliched, but we really are social animals, and even those of us who are quite comfortable in our own company and so on and so forth, you do get something. It does add a dimension just to have those conversations about, have you seen the show, or what did you think of the score at the weekend, or whatever else it might be. And I think the point you make around new starters is a really pertinent one. We are still taking on people through this period, and it's an especially difficult time for them, because you always feel a little bit out of step as a new person into a business, but that's only emphasized when literally you've never seen people other than on a laptop screen. So I do think it's an area well worth focus, and as I say, just trying to be a little bit creative about what you do to keep it interesting, keep it engaging.
Oh, and what about on the client side? I mean, I know that, from my interaction with top investment managers, customer service is very important. Maintaining contact with clients, and a lot of that's done through client events and seminars. How have you had to adapt the way that you operate to support your clients?
Yeah, so we've done a number of things that may or may not be quite predictable. Clearly, webinars are all the rage now, and lots of people have transitioned from doing their presentations in hotels to a few dozen clients to now doing them online to a similar sort of number. What we've found is by taking care and again trying to be a little bit original and think a bit differently about what people might be interested in, we've actually been able to attract much larger audiences than we ever have historically. So to give you just a few examples of those, many of the webinars we've run haven't really been about us as a business or our product. They've been much more about trying to respond what we think our clients might need or value. So quite early on, we did presentations and had speakers who could talk about the furlough scheme, who could talk about bounce back loans, who could talk about other types of government support. We had people who could talk about just the likely trajectory of the pandemic and what that meant for business and what that meant for the best ways to react and manage through the period. We actually did some work with a professional actor who talked about kind of presenting through things like Teams and Zoom and elsewhere, and you know, how can you still have that presence and that impact in a format such as this. One of the things that this kind of format does create is for some they're doing a lot more talking than they might normally, and so we had a voice coach who could talk about how to manage your voice, and you know, just lots of different things that actually perhaps were significantly differentiated from what the rest of the market were doing, perhaps differentiated to things that people have been involved in the past, but at the same time hopefully staying relevant, hopefully staying core to what is valuable to people. And as I say, that the thing that was a pleasant surprise for us, we were running webinars long before COVID, and would typically see attendees in the sort of 50s or 60s. Actually, some of the events that we've held this year have literally reached the capacity of our Zoom license up in the 300 and 400s, which again came as a surprise to us, but is arguably a testament to the fact, if you are just a little bit creative with this content, that there is an audience that's really keen to see it.
Sounds like there's a sort of thoughtful value add there about how to create that partnership environment, going through difficult times and providing information to people, which I think, you know, certainly we found over the last 12 months, people really want information and insights. It sounds like you've worked really hard on that side of things, but really interesting to hear how the attendance has gone up on what was already an existing format. It's fascinating, really, in many ways.
Yeah. I mean, I think in some respects, you know, the advantage, if I dare call it that, of this situation is people's diaries are perhaps a little bit more flexible. You know, they're home and in a position where a webinar is an easy and natural thing to attend, and so it's that old if you build it, they will come type of thing. I think as long as your content really is adding value and perhaps has some sort of original angle to it, then opportunity there.
And we've all got more energy now. We're not commuting. That's the thing. You know, we're all
for
a bit
sure.
more sharp in ways. And what's the general asset raising environment been like? I mean, obviously, you know, you're out there in the front line. How have you found it?
Yeah, it's changed as you might expect over the last 12 months or so. We certainly saw in the early part of lockdown a stagnation of fund flows. In fact, in some of our funds, particularly the collectives, we did see some outflows. I think as people just kind of panicked just a touch, if that's the right word, or certainly sort of flight to safety, should we call it, and tried to work out what was going on in the market. I think the other thing that we experienced were a number of clients who felt as though they might be able to sit out the period. Certainly when, you know, we perhaps thought or hoped lockdown might be no more than a handful of months, there were clients who took the view, okay, well, we have recurring revenues, we're not desperate for initial income. We can sit this out and then revisit clients at the other side of summer, at the other side of lockdown. Hence the real steadying off and flattening off of inflows. However, since the latest lockdown, I think what that has done is it's made people sit up and think, do you know what, it's very difficult to call the end of this. And perhaps sitting on the sidelines and waiting for it to play out is not a strategy that's going to be effective in the medium term. And therefore, engaging with the technology, finding new ways to engage clients, new ways to complete applications, and so on and so forth, is something that's not only in the interests of our clients, but in the interest of our clients. Many of our clients, they have needs and objectives that are not satisfied by waiting for the pandemic to play out. That they're best served by taking action today. And I think, as I say, as the pandemic has stretched beyond what I think any of our initial expectations were, I believe people are waking up to that, and to the extent that in the last 2 or 3 weeks, we've actually had some of the best days and weeks of inflows that we've enjoyed as a team and as a business. So I suspect still short of where we would be without the pandemic, but actually, as I say, delivering some of the best results we have in our history. So can't complain too much about that.
That's really good to hear, actually, and I'm sure lots of hard work's gone into that from the team and whatever. And do you think any of the new working practices that have been developed in the last 9, 10, 11 months will actually stick?
I think some will. I happen to think this is less a new normal than some suggest, in terms of working from home and working remotely and so on and so forth. And actually, that's my belief, not so much because I necessarily think employers are going to insist that people return to offices, although no doubt there will be some of that. But I actually think that for many, the downsides of working from home are becoming apparent. We've referred to some of them earlier, just in terms of the social aspect. I think, again, for new starters, bringing them up to speed and helping them not only integrate with the team, but understand exactly what is it the business does and how does it operate and how do the process. It's a very, very difficult thing to achieve remotely, but mostly what makes me believe that we won't stay in this sort of position, given the choices. During the last opening up, if you like, for want of a better term, what we saw were more and more people returning to the office purely of their own volition, and from the people I spoke to, largely because having had 8, 9 months working from home, very often not an especially large home, not necessarily oodles of space or whatever else it might be, people just felt a little worn out. They felt a little drained and actually wanted to get back to a more social environment. We have a large team based both in the office and in the field. And actually what we saw were people in the field absolutely chomping at the bit to get out and meet clients face to face again. I think particularly in a similar way to new starters in the business, building brand new relationships through this format leaves a lot to be desired, actually. And so I think what my reading of that is that people started to appreciate some of the advantages and some of the benefits of actually being face to face, of actually being in a team environment, and of having that kind of more human to human interaction that's just that little bit more difficult to achieve through the screens. We certainly got to the point where clients were saying to us, can we just do a phone call, not a Zoom, not a Teams? It's not that I don't want to see you or that I'm going to be sat in my pants. It's just that this will be my 9th Zoom in a row and it's really starting to wear, and I need to break it up a little bit. So we'll see how it plays out, but I am expecting some snapping back to a version of where we were previously, largely driven by the fact that ultimately I think people like getting out of their homes and not necessarily being in such a closed environment for so many days and weeks at a time.
I think a lot of people were very happy in that period where we, towards the end of the summer last year, when you could go into the office maybe a day a week, 2 days a week, that they were thrilled to see colleagues. A lot of people, I think, like their colleagues, like their job, and they found that nice blend as well of not having to go in every day. And I think, that this last lockdown in particular, people working incredibly hard, they're working long hours, and it's getting a bit monotonous. And I think on the client side, it's interesting. We talk obviously to lots of salespeople. I sometimes wish that people could be a fly on the wall in our interviews. Good salespeople love their clients, and they love seeing them.
Absolutely.
And I think being away from them, you know, has been really difficult. You know, they're social creatures in salespeople, but actually what a lot of them are is very much service driven.
Absolutely.
And remote's great, but it's not quite the same as seeing people. So I think there's lots of points there that you touched on that I couldn't agree more with. And looking forwards for, you know, the rest of 21, I mean, how do you feel about that? Are you optimistic, pessimistic, somewhere in the middle?
I'm probably somewhere in the middle in that I do think we will see some relaxation in the coming months, and I think that's probably nearer than it is further away. On the flip side of that, I feel quite confident that COVID will still be a live issue come the end of 21. I think it will be into 22 before we feel like we've seen the worst of it, and the trends are consistently in the right direction. Sadly, I think that's partly because I think what we've learned over the last year is our eagerness and our desire to get out has perhaps at the same time been the thing that's kept us in longer. You know, you look at the places that have successfully combated COVID and by successfully, I mean, you know, are now leading much more normal lives and moving around day to day. What they've tended to do is lock down early, lock down hard, and stay locked down until the numbers were really kind of nominal. And whatever you choose to put it down to, I think we've taken a different approach. And you know, as you and I talk now, I think we're both alluding to the fact that given the chance, we'd get out of the front door. And my conversations suspect that many people feel the same with us. And so my fear is that we'll continue this dance of loose of restrictions, slight increase of numbers, loose tightening of restrictions, numbers come down, and so on and so forth, until well into the back end of this year and possibly even early next. By which time I hope that the vaccine regime and other measures mean that actually it does start to feel as though we are on the track to normality.
I've got optimism, and I think the vaccine program has been an absolute miracle in terms of the speed of the rollout and
certainly, yeah,
the development. So fingers crossed for the rest of 21, and then let's hope for a very happy and prosperous 22. But thank you very much for taking the time to talk to me. It's been really informative, and I wish you well for the rest of the year.
Thanks, Simon. Good to see you.